What up, y'all? This your boy Cass with Taboo Topics. So, have I got a story for y'all today? A taboo topic out of this world, y'all. When I seen this topic today, I was like, wow, that kind of stuff really happens in the world. I mean, obviously, I keep talking about, on my channels that nothing surprises me anymore. But man, I'm wrong about that because this story took me back. I was amazed. I said, the fact that this type of situation could take place, that that a woman, a mom, can be a victim of this type of situation and go through what she went through. But check out this clip right here.
This one is my first baby, Jamie, and this is, I think, the third day home from the hospital, and that's me holding him there. And then here's another little picture of me. You'll see me a lot on the couch holding him, and I was so happy having him.
Lydia Fairchild had her first baby 4 years ago when she was 21. Despite being separated from the father, Jamie Townsend, she and Jamie had a second baby a year later.
You gotta go sit in there, buddy, okay?
And there he is looking like Elvis. I thought that was a cute picture.
Another year on, her world was plunged into even greater chaos. She was pregnant for the third time by Jamie when they split up again. With no steady work and unable to support herself and the children, she applied for welfare benefits. The state prosecutor's office required DNA tests from Jamie to prove he was the father. And as a matter of course, Lydia was also DNA tested. In December 2002, she received a phone call from the prosecutor's office.
He called me first, and I said, well, can't you give me the results over the phone? I'm just finding out who the father is. He goes, well, you really need to come up to the office. So that's when we went up to the office, and I went in the back room. Just him and that lady sat there, just stared at me. And I'm sitting by the door in this chair, and they just stared at me. And I was like, so what'd we get? He goes, well, he's 99% the father. And I'm like, okay, good. Okay, we know he's the father. And they go, well, there's a problem. And they go, there's no way you're the mother.
Lydia was stunned. She couldn't believe the DNA results said she was not the mother.
At first, I kind of laughed. I was like, what are you talking about? And they were serious. I can just see the seriousness in their faces. I mean, they're just staring me down, like totally checking me out. And then they just started drilling about, are you Lydia Fairchild? Who are you really? Where'd you get these kids from? Did your sister have these children and you're taking them and doing welfare fraud? And they just went back and forth, just drilling me.
Lydia's results were extremely unusual. A normal DNA test proving a mother-child link would show a 50% match between their DNA patterns. Yet Lydia's test showed no match at all between her DNA and that of her children. Based on these results, the chances of Lydia being the true mother of her children were 1 billion to 1.
That's real, y'all. That's really going on in the world right now, y'all. Like, it's a true story. Like, no cap. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, there's a mom in the world right now that's really going through that. And to my understanding, there's multiple people going through it right now, but it's not a story that people talk about because it's not really common. So Lydia Fairchild and her boyfriend, Jamie Townsend, went through this whole situation together. It's at a point now where it's run its course. But the way it started out was, give you a little backstory on it. So Lydia and Jamie had fell down on their luck, and they were in need of some assistance, obviously. Young families have this entitled to them. They went down to the state and tried to get some welfare assistance. They've got at the time they had 2 young children, right? And obviously the state is available. And in some of these states, they do require that blood tests are done to prove the paternity of the father. And in this situation, they took paternity of the mother as well. And I'm not too sure if that's something that's mandated in different places of the country now where the mother is done too. I've only known them to do that for the father, but they did it for the mother too. I'm sure they have their reasons. Lydia's at home one day and she's taking it easy, and she, obviously she gets this phone call from, those responsible for taking care of the blood work and things like that for them in a paternity. And they tell her, hey, Miss Fairchild, we got your results. And she's like, okay, cool. What's the results? And they say, well, for sure, Jamie's 99.9% the father of these children. She said, oh, God, I knew that. Yeah, he's the only person I'm familiar with. Okay, cool. And they say, but we need you to come down here as soon as possible. Don't hesitate. Don't pass go. Do not collect $200. They say, we need you down here right away. She say, okay, what's going on? What do I need to, I need to be concerned about that? They said, Miss Fairchild, DNA testing has shown that these children are not yours. Now, can you imagine the impression that she must have had? Now, the reaction she must have had when they said to her, this is a joke. There's no way this is the truth. Is this nephew Tommy from Steve Harvey? Because this is a joke. There's no way this is the truth. And he's like, we need you to get down here right away because we got some questions. So, I mean, man, can you imagine a mother? And for all you mothers out there, after you've carried this child or these children, 8, 9, 10 months, hard labors, possibly, uncomfortable pregnancies, possibly, the nausea, you know what I'm saying? The vomiting, the cramping, the hunger pain. I mean, you name it, right? And you get to this point and you have someone look at you and tell you that you are a fraud, that you didn't go through birth pains to have these children. Can you imagine that? Like I said, I'm a man and it hit me. You know what I'm saying? Like I couldn't imagine my mother coming to me and saying to me, son, these people say I ain't your mother. And I know I watched you come into this world, and your father's right there and can attest to it. So on that point, right? So we talked about how I guess it's not common, but it has happened before, right? So there's another woman across the country in Boston, a good, as they explain, a couple thousand miles away from Lydia. Her name is Karen Keegan. And she went through a very similar situation with her family, right? She's married. She's got 3 sons. And what happened with Karen was Karen fell ill, deathly ill. She had some serious thyroid issues. And she ended up in the hospital and she needed a blood transfusion. And as doctors usually do, they check with family first. Children especially, because children are closer than the husband most of the time, if not the parents. They tested the children, and what do you know? Say the children weren't hers. Almost the same situation. Granted, fast forward a little bit, they got with the father, and ironically, the father was a match. I'd say honestly, that's God's will, man. That he just so happened to be a match. You're talking about, meant to be. It didn't happen like that. Obviously, Karen survived the situation. She still's here, but now she has this new thing. Going back to what I was just talking about myself when I said a mother having to come to her children and say that they're claiming that I'm not your mother. Fast forward and, back to Lydia, though. Obviously, now she has this thing hanging over her head. She has these accusations that she's not who she says she is to her children. Now, in the middle of this process, she's pregnant. She's pregnant with their 3rd child. And I believe she's about 7, 8 months into this pregnancy. And obviously, the prosecution has been incorporated, or the state prosecutors has been incorporated into this situation. Now they want to press charges against Lydia for welfare fraud, because she's the one that filed the paperwork for the assistance. And they're looking at her, they're like, DNA is king. There's nothing trumps DNA. Even if it is 99.9%, nothing trumps DNA. So Lydia is like, I need a lawyer. Like, I can't believe this, that you guys are accusing me of this. I mean, they're really trying to figure it out, because they're like, well, there's just no way these are your children. They accuse the children of being her sisters, that she kidnapped them, or she kidnaps some stranger's children. They accused her of surrogacy. They accused her of of possibly being in cahoots with another, family member, and they were all in on it together. I mean, crazy stuff. Obviously, in the moment, I mean, if I'm being fair, I mean, I imagine that the prosecutors and, the courts were looking at the situation like, well, DNA can't lie, but they were sending her through all of this. You know, Lydia was going through anxiety, as she explained. She says that she couldn't sleep. I mean, how could you? She says that every time someone knocked at her door, she was terrified. Every time she heard a car go past the home, she would freak out because she thought it was them coming to take her children because they were trying to place the children with someone else. The dad, Jamie, obviously they grilled him as well. He talks about that a little bit. As a matter of fact, check out this little clip right here. He'll tell you a little bit about it.
The suspicion spilled over to Lydia's estranged partner, Jamie Townsend. He too was interviewed by the prosecutor.
Okay, they came in and basically asked me what was going on. They said, Jamie, you're 99.9% the kids, and the mother is not the mother. And I told them, I said, how could that be? I seen the kids born. And they said, you were there? And I go, yeah, I was there. They thought I was lying. They thought maybe I had kids by one of her sisters, or maybe I had kids somewhere else and that we had the kids and we were just getting a check. I think that's the way it was put to me. Basically that we were running a big fraud.
So as you can see, even Jamie explains that they held him up, accused him of all types of things, accused him of being in on it, even though he's the father. And they can, well, as they say, they can prove it based on his DNA. And he explains to them, he's like, man, we're not just trying to get a check. He's like, man, those are her children. I was there. I watched it. And to enforce both of them, there's hospital records. To my understanding, hospital staff members helped corroborate these stories. They've got birth certificates. Everything's in their name. Now they didn't talk about this, but I'm sure she's got driver's licenses and her own personal ID. I'm sure the dad does too. I'm sure that the state did their background, observations on this when they applied for this paperwork, so they can see the paperwork. But they still went through with the case. And next thing you know, Lydia looks up and now she's got to report to court. And we talked about a second ago about her needing an attorney. So imagine that. Right? She's in these attorneys' offices and she's explaining the stories. And even most attorneys, they're going to take the money if they know they can get paid. A lot of them, of course, they want to make sure they got a case. But in her situation, the way she explains it, they were looking at her like those are not your kids. I saw the paperwork. I saw the DNA results. Go find someone else to take this case. I'm not doing it. She said no one would take it because no one would believe her. It's crazy. And then, again, we fast forward. They end up in court. She's listening again to these accusations, these crazy accusations, including the judge, like, what's really going on? Whose children are these? Were you carrying someone else's children? Did you kidnap these children? The whole 9 yards. And Lydia's adamant, rightfully so. I mean, you're entitled to your truth. She's adamant. I gave birth. I don't care what you say. We can prove it based on paperwork and witnesses. And they're like, no, we're not throwing out this DNA, either way. So going back to Karen, right? Karen Kigo, right? So she hired investigators, medical investigators, to go and investigate this situation, to find out if there's other cases in the world. And granted, they hit on something. They found a few different situations in similarity. For example, hermaphrodites, if you guys have ever heard of that, they found that it's very similar to that. I believe we talked about that, where a hermaphrodite is when an individual has two separate DNA profiles, again, as we all have one. Those of us that are not suffering from such situations, right? So obviously, Karen and Lydia are not hermaphrodites, but it was found that they both shared two separate DNA profiles within their blood. So as the way it was explained, based on Karen's investigators doing the research, that somehow their DNA, one of the two overpowered the birth, and gained the DNA. The children gained that DNA that did not register in the mother's DNA, which would explain why it kept coming back the way it did. But with this research, obviously, what happened, the way that came to be in Lydia's situation. So the judge says, okay, you're pregnant. Remember that. Lydia's pregnant at this time. The judge says, okay, if you're telling the truth and this is a situation, we're going to appoint personnel to be there in the delivery room with you and with your husband when you give birth to this child. That child is not to leave the room. We're going to do some blood work right there on the spot. We're going to take the usual handprints, footprints, things like that. And we're going to see what happens. Fast forward, right? Lydia gives birth. Court-appointed person witnesses the whole thing. Blood work is done. And what do you know? It comes back. DNA says it is not her child. So now the courts have an aha moment. How about that? Aha moment. They're like, okay. Now I see that just maybe she is telling the truth because now we have proof. Even though I can still only imagine how that must have made Lydia feel. Like I told you guys. I mean, again, being fair and looking at both sides of the scenario that, I mean, DNA is usually not really wrong though, So obviously Karen and Lydia had not crossed paths. They had never met each other. Families, I should say, not just those two, had never met each other during their life. And touching on it again, one of her investigative researchers, posted an ad. And one of the prosecutors, as crazy that is, right? Prosecutors prosecuting Lydia, just so happened to come across this ad. That's God, y'all. And it got his attention. He said, wow. Mother is said to not be the mother of her children based on DNA. How about that, right? So then, that's obviously how they ended up, getting in touch with each other, because obviously the prosecutor had to inform the attorneys, and the attorneys would do their due diligence and get in touch with Karen, and they come together. And then Lydia's party is asking, obviously, can you guys look into Lydia's situation? Because we think it's the same thing here. Now, let's talk a little bit more about the research again, right? So the way they found out we talked about hermaphrodites, they were saying, well, the mothers don't have two separate organs. They weren't born with, half obviously male part, half female part. That's not the case, but they have these split DNA profiles. So what does that mean? So I guess there's some other rare cases where they took hermaphrodites and they also gave them a separate term, which they call chimerism or chimera, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I believe so, chimera. Y'all can fact check me on that if you need to, but I believe it's called chimera. In other words, it just means that the person shares two DNA profiles, but is not a hermaphrodite, which would explain the two profiles. And so eventually they were able to match them up. They were able to find out that Karen and Lydia share DNA with the children, but it was after extensive testing and blood work and different things like that. And they had to test nearly every part of the person's body just to find it. But eventually they found the second DNA trait, and they found it in Lydia as well as Karen. And the crazy part about that is, as they were doing this research and searching, they were even able to link relationships between the children, as they tested the children as well, with the siblings of the mom. And of course, like the grandparents and people like that, it just didn't directly link with the mom, which, as I know I just explained it, but it still got me kind of lost for words. Cause I'm like, wow, that can really happen. Like man, I'm telling y'all, this story crazy, man. We talk about these crazy topics over here, man. And this is what I'd be looking for. I'd be looking for these topics that a lot of us are not imagining could be going on around us, and that it could be a real thing, I'm going to put this documentary, or at least I'm going to tag it in the link so you guys can check it out. Crazy stuff, y'all. I mean, as they went down a rabbit hole a little bit and to talk about these conditions and chimerism, Yeah, y'all, like I said, I'm tearing that word up. I already know, but y'all can check me on if y'all need to. But you know how these documentaries, they go into different places, with the story, and they were talking about hermaphrodites, and they were showing these images of how this one child was born where literally split down the middle. You can see the difference between fair skin and darker skin. There's like a straight line that separated it. Or another child where you could see one child had that became an adult had a female breast and a male breast, and they were like checkered. I, if that's too much, I mean, I'm sorry, y'all, but it's crazy stuff. Like I've said, the fact that this stuff goes on in the world, and they get into explaining how it happened. I mean, and they get into explaining more details. But of course, obviously, we're not really here to talk more about that. But again, obviously, the fact that stuff like that can happen around us and in this world. But again, so um, they were able to distinguish that Lydia was telling the truth based on this work that they had done between these doctors and this research that was done. And it's I think we're at a place now, which I will hope so, that it's getting the attention of those that are responsible for monitoring these types of things in the world of medicine. We talk about the Republicans, and Republicans are trying to push new policies that says babies should be, DNA tested at birth, and blood should be drawn. It shouldn't just be handprints and footprints and things like that. And with technology, I mean, I understand why that's happening, obviously, because there's so much changing in the world right now. Like a lot of you guys are probably familiar with the 23andMe and how now law enforcement is now implementing that type of technology into cases, and they're solving crimes and things like that, which again is a whole nother story. But even touching on that a little bit, y'all, this is crazy too, right? So members of the prosecution team in Lydia's case, some of them were quoted as making statements about cases that they had tried with DNA, where they were sure that the DNA is what solved it, even though they had no other evidence. Now think about that for a second. I mean, because some of them were saying that we let people scot free. We just let them go scot free because DNA didn't match. And it was said that some of them in the prosecution office was saying, well, is it possible that a few of these individuals that we let go were actually guilty? Is it possible that some of the people that we have sitting in prison right now for some of these crimes are actually innocent because the DNA wasn't supposed to match them because it's split? Like it could be, it's weird, but like one of the, I don't know, the siblings or a different family member, y'all. I mean, we we're talking about how scientists want you to believe that certain things scientifically is foolproof. And now this is a situation that proves it's not. Now I'm sure they might argue the fact that, that 99.9%, so that extra 1.1% is the mishaps. That's a large percentage in my book. I don't care what they say, because if you guys were willing to lock this mother up and take her children and she was innocent because of DNA, and that DNA was wrong because you guys didn't understand. I mean, come on. You know what I'm saying? I mean, you come on. Let's really think about that. And the fact that what the prosecution team is feeling guilty about, the fact that not that it can be true, that it probably is true, and there's no real way of really finding out without real research being done. It's mind-boggling, y'all. It's mind-boggling. Like I said, when I saw this story, I'm like, because it just goes to show that, because I'm one of the people that's always saying nothing surprises me. But this is one of them stories that surprised me. I did not see it coming. I watch a lot of stuff because I look for those topics that will have you like lost in the sauce, like second guessing what we believe we know. And this is definitely one of them, y'all. But like I said, it all worked out. Lydia, she managed to get the charges dropped because obviously they were able to prove it. In Karen's situation, she was able to prove that she was the mother of, to her children. And, going into that, she did explain that she had anxiety, that mothers obviously have a certain role in their hearts where they want to be represented as, a certain figure to their children. They want their children to see them, in a certain light. And the idea that, a child could think that you hid something from them, or you put something over their eyes to keep secrets and things like that. The idea that they could have been adopted, or the idea that they could have been even crazy than kidnapped or something like that. And the idea of her she talked about having anxiety, that just the fact that they could even consider that, I could only imagine, but it worked out for Karen too. And like I said, and now, it's another 2 cases that's in the book for scientists to look at and to understand, obviously, that when they think they had everything figured out, that they don't. At least I would hope that they understand that, and enough of them are looking at that now. Because again, I told you, as God, the fact that that prosecutor saw that, because the prosecutor is the one that brought it to the light, where usually it's not the prosecution, because they just want to close the books. I heard a case today, and I'm not going to get too far off topic, but I heard a case today where a guy was locked up for 16 years for a rape that no evidence could prove he committed. And they got an inkling that he confessed to it. And because of the confession, as the gentleman explained, was they were going at him so hard that he felt like there was nothing else for him to do, even though he knew the evidence would match. And he somehow believed that, well, the evidence would trump his confession because it would prove he didn't do it. They took that confession and they just threw the book at him. They didn't even look. And they had all these other witnesses involved, that could prove, and evidence, I should say, that could also help prove that he really didn't do this thing. Because obviously when he went to court and he started going to trial, he was, he stood up and he said, hey, it's not the truth. I didn't do this. I felt coerced and pressured, and I was tired, and I was young, and I was all these things. You know what I'm saying? But the point I'm making is, I'm just saying that nothing is foolproof now. And I think we got to understand it. I think we all should have an open mind and be willing to see that just maybe what's in front of me may not be exactly what's in front of me. Now, I'm not saying that we should have anxiety and stress out about every decision in life. I'm just saying, but this situation with Lydia and Karen just goes to show that we got to be a little bit more mindful, y'all. But anyway, let's keep this story going. I mean, obviously, I want to hear more about it. If you guys have more to add to it, if you guys have heard of stories like this, let me know. If you guys have more interesting stories to send me that are considered taboo, because, my topics, I like to talk about things that people stay away from. Or if people are not staying away from it, I like to talk about the things within the topic that they're staying away from. And let's touch on it and go into it and dig into it deep, y'all. But this is your boy Chaos with Taboo Topics. Like I said, let me know what y'all think. And I'm going to put those things in the comment section for y'all. And that's where we at with it. Peace.